How do young service members buy expensive ass cars while enlisted? Today we're going to talk about it, and I'll tell you a few things. The very first thing to know is that they're broke. Like, this is a financially irresponsible purchase, and we're going to dig into it. We are going to show you and tell you how it happens, and then we're going to talk about the right way to buy vehicles, the way that I've bought vehicles after I got good with money, and the benefit to using the how to buy vehicles the right way to build wealth for future self, so that now I'm looking at buying really expensive Porsches, vice being broke. Now, when I say they're broke, here's what I mean. It is generally accepted amongst the finance community that 30 to 35% of your gross paycheck could go at the high end towards buying a vehicle. So that means if you make $100,000 a year, you should be buying a $30,000, $35,000 vehicle. If you make $40,000 a year, you should be buying like a $10,000, $15,000 vehicle. So as an active duty service member, you're really capped at what you should be buying for a reasonable purchase, which is why I say financially irresponsible. Because buying a $60,000, $70,000 Charger, Mustang, Challenger, Supra, whatever, is not within that budget unless you're pulling in like $200K. Now, I understand, I will say that $40,000 military salary is way more money than $40,000 non-military salary because of all the benefits and everything. So I'd say yes, depending on your housing situation, you could realistically buy a more expensive car per your W-2 taxable salary than your civilian counterparts. That doesn't necessarily justify what we see on military bases, which is really nice cars. And I think there's a couple reasons for this. I think one, service members, especially like Marines, which is where I come from, but like service members are innately kind of more alpha personalities, and so they gravitate towards nicer and or flashier things a lot of times. I think there's also a stigma, at least there was when I first joined during OIF, OEF, where if I kind of looked through things through the lens of like, I might die, on a deployment, so why does it matter if I save money? Wrong mentality. Here I am wishing I'd save more money. There's a couple other things though. So it takes, somebody who's financially responsible and ready and willing to throw everything at a car. It takes a, shall we say, I believe, spirited car dealership, like a car dealership that's willing to, and honestly, you know what? Spirit is the wrong word. Let's say a self-serving car dealership, because realistically, like, I'm all for commissions and whatever, but like, if the car dealership makes $1,000 off a Challenger and $950 off of a Civic, because whatever, then like, sell you the Civic because it's better for you. Like, the right way to run a dealership is to sell cars in a way that people come back to you. The best car salesmen understand that you should offer the right product to the right person so that they remember that and come back, rather than being short-sighted and selling one vehicle to somebody that's going to put them underwater and they never use you again and you get bad word of mouth. Unfortunately, we see this right outside of bases where car dealerships target young service members, and they don't care about that service member's well-being. They care about getting them in a sexy car and making a commission, right? So it takes an aggressive car dealership. It also takes an aggressive credit union or financing protocol. And for a long time now, I've been talking about how the auto industry is overpriced, and honestly, I think it might be the pillar that pulls for the next, recession that we see. I don't think it's gonna be real estate. I think it's gonna be auto loan and auto industry, and that's another conversation for another situation. But it takes a financing person who's willing to say, this would be your monthly payment, and you're like, wow, that's too expensive. They're like, well, what if we made it 6 years? What if we made the note 7 years? What if we made it 8 years? And by taking a traditionally 5-year auto loan and making it an 8-year loan, you can drastically reduce the monthly cost. So then the service member looks at it from a monthly standpoint, because they're knuckleheads and they don't look at the big picture. And they're like, yeah, I can afford that payment. Well, the 8-year financing probably adds $15,000 to $30,000 in just interest payments to your purchase price. So now, instead of buying a $60,000 car that'll cost you $75,000 or $70,000 by the time you're done paying it off, you're buying a $60,000 car that might cost you closer to $100,000 by the time you're done paying it off. And if I told you you were going to pay $100,000 for a Challenger that was only worth $60,000, Some of you would still do it, but hopefully you would realize that's a bad deal. And so you shouldn't go off the monthly cost. You should go over the total cost. And so, they're broke. And let's be real, most of these service members are not buying the V6 Mustang, the V6 Charger, the V6 Challenger. They're going for like a Scat Pack, which if you're, under an E7 and you want a Scat Pack, like, you don't need that. Also, and I will just throw this out there, I rented a Scat Pack Challenger the other day on Turo because my Tesla Model X was in the shop, and it was grossly underwhelming. Like, it sounded cool, it looked cool, but it couldn't even hold its own traction, so it was slow. And I was scared to punch it coming out of a corner, and I am quite versed in driving, and so I would just say, overrated car. I would never own one. And before anyone goes off and like, oh, this guy has a Tesla Model X, I'll talk to you about how I buy vehicles in a minute, and I promise you I got a good deal. Okay, so if you get a financially aggressive or irresponsible Marine, and you get a spirited or self-serving car dealership, and you get an aggressive credit union, and you take all three of these things and you throw them together, and you look at the monthly payment, and you're like, I eat at the chow hall, I don't have a housing cost because I live in the barracks, medical, dental, healthcare is all covered. Yeah, I could spend 75% of my monthly paycheck on this car because this car makes me happy. Then that's how service members are able to justify in their own heads and make this purchase. But let me talk to you about the biggest downside to this. And the biggest downside is opportunity cost. And opportunity cost is just a sexy way of saying, if you invested now, it would be worth a whole hell of a lot more down the road than if you invest in 5 years. And so when you're looking at this and you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, and Peter happens to be your future self, so you're taking away from your future financial success to create the enjoyment now, you're setting yourself up for failure. One of the most popular studies done was what we call the marshmallow study on this, and it was on success indicators. And what it says, essentially what it found was basically they put kids in a room, and they gave them a marshmallow, and then they left. And they were like, gonna be gone for 20 minutes. So they basically told the kid, hey, I'll be back in a few minutes. If you eat the marshmallow, okay. If you don't eat the marshmallow, we'll give you a second one when we come back. And they found that, whatever percentage of kids was able to wait, and they had what we call delayed gratification, so they were willing to and able to wait for that second marshmallow instead of just eating the first one. And then they tracked these kids for like 30, 40 years. And the children who were able to, they had delayed gratification capabilities, right? I don't know the correct way to word that, were more successful on almost every metric over the next 40 years. High school, college, jobs, careers, life, financials, net worth, whatever, because they're able to play the long game. And in life, especially in finances and investing, the long game is where you win. If you look at Warren Buffett's net worth, it's like this, and then it just, and that's the long game. Like most of the vast majority, 80, 90% of his net worth came in the last 10, 20 years of his life so far. He was always a good investor, but compound interest takes time and it accelerates with time. And so if you're able to buy a more reasonable vehicle and take the money you could have or would have spent on that Challenger into a investment, whether that's index funds or real estate or, a high yield savings account or whatever. We're not going to go into the investing side, but just somewhere, and you increase the savings gap, you are going to dramatically build that, nest egg, shall we call it. And then eventually you'll be able to buy the nicer vehicle. And so using myself as an example, right? I've never bought a vehicle newer than 8 years old. And I've owned quite a few fun vehicles. Now, I guess I should clarify. I did buy a Harley brand new when I was deployed. Not a great financial decision. I ended up actually making all my money back out of that vehicle. And I think there's an argument probably for owning a motorcycle as a first-time user because, if something fails, if you were misled on something with the vehicle and it fails, that could be much more costly towards your life than, a vehicle per se. So I can understand that argument, and they're also much more reasonably priced. But I also am not going to make the argument that you need a motorcycle. You don't, says the guy who has a Ducati right now. But I digress. So I owned a 2001 Honda S2000 that I turbocharged in my garage and ripped around corners, took on track days, whatever. I've owned, the Integras. I've owned a bunch of older vehicles. I rebuilt an F-250, a 1988 F-250 custom, 6-speed. I rebuilt the engine from the ground up, pulled it and everything. I've had 4 motorcycles. I've had quite a few sports cars. And then my most recent vehicle was a Volkswagen Jetta diesel, and I loved that. That's my 3rd TDI diesel Jetta, whether a sedan or wagon. And they're all phenomenal vehicles. And then the Tesla Model X. I would have kept the wagon. Honestly, it was an incredible vehicle. I bought it at 21,000 miles for $12,900, so $13,000. And then I put 105,000 miles on it over the next 3-4 years, and I sold it for $6,500. And so I got half my money back out of a vehicle I put over 100,000 miles on. I'd call that a win, and it got 40 miles a gallon. That being said, the Tesla Model X came because a buddy was selling an 8-year-old Tesla Model X for what he owed on it, which was like $38,000. And it was the full self-driving, already paid for, free supercharging for life, like unicorn car. And so it's worth more than that. And it doesn't have the high maintenance, and it doesn't have the gas, and it does. So like, ultimately my monthly payment on that more expensive vehicle was about equal to what I was paying all in on the Jetta. So I'm really just out the difference on insurance, because the electrical bill here in Missouri is negatable. And so I also have equity in the vehicle. I mean, now I think I owe 31 on it, and it's probably worth 50. And it's just a great car, comfortable, high safety ratings, very reliable. My kid loves it, all the things. And here's the real justification is it has full self-driving. And so I'm able to conduct work functions while on road trips that I wouldn't be able to before. And so it actually helped me buy back a lot of my time, which is very valuable to me. So all that being said, I don't know that I need to justify buying a more expensive vehicle because I've earned it. And so like, for example, this year we had to hit $100,000 month in revenue. We've done that twice. And I have to pay off the rest of my credit card debt. I'm almost there. And then I will be allowed to, that's my personal, allowed to go buy my Porsche. And I'm gonna buy either a Turbo S or a GT3 or a GT3 RS, depending on what I find on auctions for the right deal. And that is a long time coming, because what I did when I got into real estate was I sold all of those toys. When I realized finances, I sold the Harley, I sold the S2000, I sold the truck, and I had just a wagon or just a TDI. And I sold all the toys to buy a duplex, another duplex, rolled that into a hotel, and then we're rolling that. So those purchases are ultimately what are going to be able to allow me to buy the Porsche. So I say all that just to say, be okay not driving the supercar right now, and be better with your finances, and you will be able to buy a much nicer car down the road. And I've got a full video on deep diving into how I analyze vehicles and what I look for. But the long short is, you should look for something that's at least 5 to 6 years old, because at that point they've depreciated down to about 50%, and vehicles kind of level off on depreciation. So it goes from a steep drop to chilling. And so that's the right place to buy, because the vehicle still has life, it still has legs, it still has mileage, it still has everything if it's been maintained well, but it's not going to plummet in value like a brand new vehicle will. And it's still going to have all the nice stuff because it's newer. You want to look for reliable brands. Honestly, Toyota is the most reliable brand out there. Teslas are great, though we haven't seen longevity to know how reliable they are comparatively, but Toyotas are great. Teslas are great. There's a whole laundry list of data on what vehicles hold their value the best. And you want to look for something that holds value well, low maintenance. I loved those Jettas, but they were expensive to maintain, vice a Camry or a Tacoma. And so Toyota will probably be where I go going forward for dailies if it's not a Tesla. And I say all of this just to say, be smart with your financial purchase when it comes to a vehicle, and you will set yourself up successfully for the future and the long term when it comes to real estate and or however you want to achieve financial freedom, and then be able to live a life on your terms. It's worth a little bit of sacrifice right now, and not driving the coolest car on the block to be able to set yourself up for success. And I guess a final note on that, I would definitely make sure that you can afford the vehicle at a 5-year payoff. If you're having, if you want to extend it to 8 years so you have a lower payment and you're going to invest the difference, I could kind of get behind that depending on your interest rate for the vehicle. But if you're just extending it because you can't afford the payment without extending it from 5 to 8 years, like, do not buy that car. You should be able to afford the 5-year payment on that vehicle, and you should honestly try to pay it off a little bit quicker and accelerate that amortization. But I've got other videos on car buying. I'll link to it down below if you want to go into the nitty gritty on how to do this. And if you're watching this and you want to see a little bit more about how to actually set yourself up financially for success in the future, I would encourage you to check out the playlist, which is How to Get Rich in the Military. I've got quite a few videos on there that talk about like the ways I use, the plan I recommend, what I wish I'd done. And then I've got a whole playlist on the VA loan, and all of those things can and ultimately help you earn a much nicer vehicle than a Challenger. Like, do you really want to drive the same Challenger that everybody else on base drives, or the same Mustang? Like, save up some money and go buy a freaking Lotus or a Ferrari or a McLaren, like something cool to drive on base. And I'm not saying you need that as a young enlisted guy. I'm saying, like, get to a place financially where you could buy the damn thing cash and nobody can say a word to you. That's where you want to be. You want to have FU money. It's more fun, I promise.